Hello, listeners. This is Mike Sollosi. Retro Encounter is only a few weeks away from episode 150, and we're planning to make it a mailbag episode in which we respond to as many listener emails as we can. So if you wanted to send us a discussion topic idea, a question about the podcast, or a suggestion for a Game Journal episode in the future, please send an email to retro@rpgfan.com before we record the episode in mid-August. We are 100% going to choose at least one future episode from listener suggestions, but first we need those emails. So again, the email address is retro@rpgfan.com. We will respond to as many messages as we can in episode 150. But that's enough for me. Now here is the latest episode of Retro Encounter. Hello and welcome to episode 148 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly Podcast. I'm Mike Sollosi and I'm your host for today. And today, well, you might see Final Fantasy there in the title, and we are going to talk about Final Fantasy VII, but this is not a dedicated, celebratory, nostalgic Final Fantasy VII episode. You'll see what I mean in just a few minutes, but before we get to that, let's introduce the panel joining me today, starting with Rogan.
Hey, hey.
And also Leona McCallum.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
And thirdly, Peter Triezenberg.
Hello, everybody.
Now, the four of us, we've all played Final Fantasy VII. We know it well enough at least to talk about it on the podcast, and we've each had our own different experiences with Final Fantasy VII, and we'll get to those. But what we're going to do for this special episode is talk about the future a little bit. Final Fantasy VII had a special remake announced at E3 in, I want to say, 2014? 4 years ago? Is that correct? Or
A long time ago.
It was 2015.
2015, okay.
I believe, yeah.
That's right. 4 E3s ago, which is 3 years ago. Right, okay. That's why I was confused.
That's how I count my birthdays in E3s.
Let's see. What video games were announced 3 years ago? Oh, yeah, Shenmue 3.
That was my first E3 was the following year, so I did not
same.
attend that one. Yeah, that's when you and I met for the first time, Peter.
Yeah, right. But no, I remember that year was the first E3 I covered for the site, and it was a hype show. That was just so many big announcements.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. In general, I thought that the E3 2 years ago and this past year were really fun for all the information that we were covering. But the one last year in 2017 was less fun than the two sandwiching years for me in terms of what games were being covered and what games were playable on the show floor. Like, even though E3 2018 was a little light, I got to play Dragon Quest XI, Mega Man 11, and Fist of the North Star. So I'm 1,000% satisfied.
I mean, fair enough, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that's enough about E3. But E3 2015 did announce the Final Fantasy VII Remake to audience gasps and cheers and perhaps tears. So its development, or maybe I shouldn't say development. The announcements surrounding its development have been up and down. Up and down. I don't want to say concerning. I don't want to throw a negative adjective on it. But there's been a lot to talk about with the Final Fantasy Remake versus everything that we know and love about Final Fantasy VII. So that's what today's episode is. We are going to discuss our hopes and fears and wants and concerns about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. So, gentlemen and lady, I think we should just talk about what Final Fantasy VII means to each of us briefly, like when we played it, how much we like it, and our overall thoughts about it. But the whole episode's not going to be about this, so let's all try to be a little brief. Starting with you, Peter. What's your basic personal history with Final Fantasy VII, and how much do you like it? Just general terms.
Well, as far as personal history goes, this is actually kind of a funny story. I first played Final Fantasy VII at a school science fair, weirdly enough. They had at Science Olympiad. It was an event that nearby Grand Valley State University held. They had a break room where you could rent out video games for a set amount of time in between events. So they'd have a bunch of consoles set up, PS1s and PS2s mostly, and a list of games that they had behind the counter, and you could go in and borrow them for a set amount of time and play them. And that's when I ended up playing through the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, up till about the end of the bombing mission when I had to leave. That was my first time playing the game. I was an element.
So that was solid 25 or 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, it was just a half hour. I was just taking a break, waiting for a friend to show up, so we could go to their event. And yeah, so that was a lot of fun, and the game stuck out in my mind. I didn't even know what it was at the time. I recognized the name Final Fantasy. I was really young at the time, and I played it. And I'm like, oh, it's a turn-based game. RPG wasn't really in my vocabulary at the time, but I knew Pokemon, so I kind of had a basic grasp of what to do. I liked that the guy's name was Cloud. I thought that was cool. And then it was ages later that I actually kind of became more of a Final Fantasy fan. Went out and got the game. I think I actually played it in earnest through PlayStation Network a while later.
Oh wow, that is a while later.
Yeah, got PlayStation Network version. Played it at one of my cousins was a big fan of it, so he had the game and kind of talked me through it. I would get the PC port on Steam, played through that version. It's been general. That game's been a pretty active. I've played through it a couple times. Got really into the compilation when that was all coming out.
Right on.
Right. If in general, Final Fantasy VII to me is just kind of like when I sit back and think Final Fantasy, that's kind of what comes to mind. That mire of spin-offs and stuff.
And you and I did discuss at least part of the compilation when we had our Final Fantasy Film Festival episode last year. You and I suffered through 3 Final Fantasy movies, including FF VII Advent Children.
And I think we walked away from that feeling that Advent Children was the best of a bad bunch.
Yeah, basically, yes. if
the
memory
most Final
serves.
Fantasy, at least.
Yeah, it's like at least I reckon I know some of what's going on here.
Well, that's cool. Rob, your turn. Basically, what is your personal history with Final Fantasy VII, the original?
So, I remember I got it on Christmas in 1997. I was about 13 or 14 years old, and kind of like Peter, I hadn't really played RPGs, let alone JRPGs, turn-based RPGs up to that point. So it was kind of new for me, right? But I do remember I did give it a shot. I got as far as I think Cosmo Canyon. I think the boss, Cosmo Canyon, and I remember being stuck on that boss. And I actually put it down for
the ghost of the Gi tribe leader thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I remember putting it down for a few months, but for whatever reason, I came back to it a couple months after that. Did whatever I needed to do. I got past that, and once I passed that threshold, just completely obsessed with it. Staying up late, late long nights playing through it, and really it acted as the catalyst to getting me to fall in love with the JRPG genre. Right. Consider it my favorite game. Probably my favorite RPG up to this day, I guess.
All right.
As I'm getting older, I'm finding I'm labeling things as my favorite less and less. I just kind of like things, right? So, but if I had to say any one video game was my favorite, probably still into this day, it would be Final Fantasy VII. Even if I hadn't actually played it in a few years now. So I was very excited. I was actually very excited to hear the announcement about the remake, and it did elicit a little bit of an emotional reaction from me. I think as was the case for a lot of folks watching that. But yeah, it has a special place in my heart. And really looking forward to it. Tentatively excited about what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing and reading. So
awesome.
Yeah, that's my shit.
And the older we get, the less you're thinking of list of favorites. I don't subscribe to that. As someone who literally has dozens of spreadsheets about video games and video game blog posts and video game podcasts. I just compulsively make lists and charts of things. So I'm afraid you and I have different personalities in some respects, Rob. But
the obsessive compartmentalizing type.
yeah, sometimes I'm also a hypocrite because I get annoyed when people over-categorize and over-compartmentalize things when they're during a discussion. But I am like the worst example of that also. But enough about me. Leona, it's your turn. What is your basic personal history with Final Fantasy VII and your feelings about it?
Well, Final Fantasy VII was probably the biggest game in my childhood. It was the game for me when I didn't.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
no, you grew up in Scotland, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Scotland.
And Final Fantasy VII was the first Final Fantasy game to hit Europe and the UK in general, in particular.
Oh,
correct?
was it? Yeah, I think so. Actually, yeah, you're right. It was because we didn't get Final Fantasy 3 or anything before that. It was
Right.
the big game.
Cool. Okay. So did that affect it? Was it one of the first RPGs you played?
Yeah, it was the first like RPG, maybe even video game that I had played.
Oh wow! All right.
Yeah.
Okay, continue, please.
I didn't have any consoles growing up, so I used to go to my friend's house and he would have Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and I fell in love with 7, and I kept coming over to his house every day, and I'd be like to his mom, even if he wasn't home, can I come in and play Final Fantasy 7? And she'd be like, oh, okay, come in. And then I'd go to his room and I'd play Final Fantasy 7. So it was a huge deal for me. It was like the biggest joy I had as a little kid. So it was very special to me, very important growing up. And then eventually I loved it so much that my friend gave me his copy of Final Fantasy 7, which I still have to this day.
Awesome.
Nice.
That's sweet. And this is a little unusual. I also have memories of playing Final Fantasy VII with my best friend growing up. But unlike I guess unlike you guys, I was already playing RPGs before Final Fantasy VII came out. Final Fantasy IV, which was my first RPG, and I thought it was Final Fantasy II at the time.
Right.
Right.
Weird numbering system.
Exactly. So I already liked Final Fantasy and had played 1, 4, and 6 by the time FF VII came out when I was in elementary school. I guess I was 11 when it came out, and several of my friends were also excited about it. But I didn't have a PlayStation. I got consoles a little late around that time. So, but my best friend, who likes Final Fantasy every bit as much as I do, did have a PlayStation. So he got it at launch, and I would run back to his house every day for a few weeks to play it with him, or really he was playing and I was watching.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind. It was his game and I was there to watch. I wasn't a jerk about it. And so it was a big deal at the time among both the kids at school and just our fandom in general.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So I definitely wanted to play it, even though I didn't see my friend play all the game through, just large chunks of it. So I did want to get a copy for it myself. So I got the PC version in '98 or '99, I don't know exactly when, and played through that. And then when I eventually did get a PlayStation, I bought a greatest hits copy of FF7 and played it through then. So I've played it through at least twice. I think maybe there was one later playthrough in the 2000s. Possibly, but I don't 100% remember. So I've played Final Fantasy VII 2 or 3 times. I like it a lot. I think it's an excellent game of that era. I think it's a very important Final Fantasy game for a lot of reasons. It's not one of my overall favorites. If I had to, make a list of personal favorite RPGs, it probably wouldn't be in the top 10. And if I made a list of favorite Final Fantasy games, it would probably be neighborhood of 4th or 5th. So I definitely like this game, and it's important to me. But it's maybe not one of my super overall favorites. But again, I don't want to sound like a hater. It's excellent, and I think very important as a game, both as an RPG and as a Final Fantasy game.
That's how I feel. Sorry, that's how I feel. Like even though it's very important to me, Final Fantasy VII, it isn't actually my favorite Final Fantasy. My favorite Final Fantasy is Final Fantasy IX, objectively. But if I was to go by what was most important to 7-year-old Leona, it was Final Fantasy VII.
I mean, Final Fantasy IX is objectively the best game in the series, as dictated by as dictated by our own podcast.
Okay, mathematically, we did determine it's the best, but I think that's actually a hidden numbers trick, because if you turn number 9 upside down, you get 6, and that's actually the best Final Fantasy game.
No, I won't accept that.
Okay,
but if you add up 6 twice, you get 12.
No, death, double no.
Okay, so all right, we're not going to have that discussion again, but we did have a best Final Fantasy episode take place over a year ago, and we did determine that Final Fantasy IX was the best Final Fantasy game. I am not going to argue those results, even though my personal favorite is 6. But
going back though to 7 though, it's like I think it's important to recognize like that like you said, Mike, it's an important game. And it is still like a pretty great game that's important to a lot of people. I think a lot of people, it kind of gets caught in that kind of hipster crowd level of it's popular, ergo it sucks.
Yeah.
And it has had...
It's overrated. Okay.
Right. It's like the guy in Starbucks who brings a record player and phonograph headphones
when I was
chai latte.
when I was frequenting Final Fantasy forums in the 2000s, I remember taking place in an extremely circular argument where like someone started the Final Fantasy is overrated thread, and my comment was, I think people have been calling it overrated too much, to which point I think it's underrated now, which is confusing and dumb, and I hate the terms overrated and underrated.
That's what I said.
Because of dumb arguments like that.
I had a whole argument with people on the Discord about how much I hate people calling things overrated.
Right, everyone has a different opinion on what that rated benchmark is.
Exactly.
So it basically just turns into a it turns into a way of saying like or dislike, but in a way that sounds pseudo-intellectual. Like, I don't dislike this game. No, it's overrated. Right. See, I'm on an elevated opinion, so I know how this game is supposed to be rated, and it's overrated. I think that overrated, underrated has an air of intellectual elitism too, which I was when I was an intellectual elitist, I definitely used all the time. But now I find it frustrating and
now that you're not an intellectual elitist.
Yeah. Now that I am aware of how much of an idiot I actually am, now I dislike those arguments. But back when I was a smartass, I called things overrated, underrated, left and right.
But I may have argued with you on the internet back in the early 2000s, Mike.
It's possible. If you were on GameFAQs or cavesofnarsh.com, then maybe.
Oh, I was on GameFAQs, definitely. So I think the thing with overrated kind of gets wrapped up in hype, right? So when people just get tired of hearing about something, whether or not it's good or not, they tend to just label it as overrated, rather than just simply stating this is a good game or this is a good piece of media. I'm just tired of hearing about it. It's lazy. It's a lazy argument.
A reaction against. I think you're right. I think it might be a reaction against hype instead of because I briefly touched on the concept of ratedness, but if someone doesn't like something as much as the hype that surrounds it, then they would fall into the overrated box, I think. Regardless of whether Final Fantasy VII is overrated or underrated, I think that the mountain of hype surrounding it is undeniable and enormous. It's probably still the most popular Final Fantasy game.
There's a reason that Cloud and Sephiroth and all those other guys keep showing up in other games. There's a reason that we got a decade's worth of supplemental material and a CGI film, and there's a reason that Square is spending millions upon millions of dollars trying to remake the thing.
And this is the one that's getting the multi-million-dollar remake, and not
a game, not a game that could actually benefit from the update.
Sure.
Because 8 is fundamentally broken.
Well, I mean the argument of why 7 and not 6, or why 7 and not 9. That argument would just probably
why 7 and not 15.
And one of my close friends had said, why 7 and not 6? 6 is a 2D game, 7's already a 3D game. It's like he's just saying that because he likes 6 more than 7. But this one I think probably was the best candidate for a remake because, again, it has so much hype surrounding it, and it was the first global one, I think, because it was the first one to have a release in Europe. To my memory, It had one of the biggest launches in Final Fantasy history and probably the largest fan base in Final Fantasy history. So I think it was a logical choice for a remake. Whether
Right.
Oh
we
yeah.
whether it's our favorite or not, it's definitely a very important game, and I think it makes sense that this is the one that they remade. So, uh, moving on a little bit, let's talk about the news surrounding the remake, what we know. Now, we're recording this in late July 2018, and this is posting for another few weeks. But uh, Final Fantasy VII's remake did not have a lot of information revealed at E3 2018. It was perhaps a conspicuous absence from that conference, which is unusual because it was announced at E3 3 years earlier. But
It's why we held off recording this until July.
yeah, we'd been talking about recording this for a few months, but we decided, oh, you know what, there might be some Final Fantasy VII news at E3, so let's wait until we get that before we talk about it. And
Yeah.
and unusually there wasn't any. And Nomura and his or members of the remake's development team did have a few sort of low key announcements following the conference, where they said,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's being worked on, but it has run into some development issues." The one that surprised me, maybe this is old information, but I think I read it for the first time within the past month or so, that it was being developed by a separate studio, but then they scrapped
Yeah.
most of the work that studio did.
that is old information.
That is old
Yeah.
information. Okay.
So what happened was that when the game was announced, they were outsourcing part of the development to CyberConnect 2, the company that made Asura's Wrath, the Dot Hack games, Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm, et cetera, et cetera. And that gameplay demo that they revealed the same year as the announcement, I think that was in December 2015. They released the PS4 port of FF7 and that gameplay demo. That was from their build. Evidently, Square was not satisfied with the results, and they chose to scrap the entire partnership with CyberConnect 2 and begin in-house development and end rent.
Weird.
Right. Yeah. I was reading today. So it was kind of weird where it was so bad that they didn't want to reuse most of it, but it was far enough along where they couldn't salvage it. And it was kind of a weird catch-22 there, right?
Which sucks. That really does
yeah.
kind of suck.
Also, it's amazing that it was that bad that Square Enix was like, I can't help this.
I'm typing some shade there. Oh, man.
I love that shade.
I mean, there's also the fact, too, that Nomura has been working on 2 major projects for the company. And he even said that now that Kingdom Hearts 3 is just about out the door, now he's going to be devoting pretty much his full attention to the 7 remake.
Is he the only person that works at Square Enix? Or
they wanted to get the original team back where possible, is from my understanding. I don't really have a source for that, but from the way they've described it is that they want to be as faithful as they can, and they want to get this right.
And I think Nomura or one of the other producers did say that they probably announced it too early. Like they should have been. They wish they had been further along during the announcement, so they wouldn't run into these. They maybe wouldn't have run into these roadblocks as publicly as they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about this on Slack a lot, but I think Square has a tendency to announce things at the conceptual stage, not so much as this is ready to. We not even like the versus 13 to 15 thing. You know, they announce things as concepts. And then,
okay. To be fair, they did the opposite of that for Octopath Traveler, because Octopath Traveler is a Square Enix game with Square Enix producers, and they announced it less than a year of before its release, and its release has been, I would say, fairly positive. So, good on them for doing
Traveler too.
Yeah, good on them for timing that announcement well, but the timing for both Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII's remake has been a little bit less good, since those have been sort of in the public space now for a long time prior to coming out. And I don't want to characterize a feeling for the entire Final Fantasy VII fan base, which of course is enormous and diverse. But I think I think the Final Fantasy VII fans are starting to grumble a little bit. Like it's again, maybe this remake doesn't have everything that every fan would want, and there's I think some legitimate concerns and about this remake because its development seems tumultuous. I think is one of the words that we threw around.
Hmm. Um, as you said, Final Fantasy VII's fan base is so large; it's hard to pin down one feeling for it. It does have its die-hard fans, but I've also seen a lot of support for people who didn't maybe quite like Final Fantasy VII, are excited to play an updated version, which they feel is more playable rather than a game made for people who already love Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, like I mean, accessibility is something that we always talk about when we're sussing out our feelings about a game. Like, do you already have to be deep into something to understand and love this, or is it good for new players and returning players? Like
Hmm.
that. Some people get that maybe are fans and have a an exclusive attitude towards this don't want accessibilities. They want games made for them and people that
Yeah,
love older
that
series as much as they do.
I don't get behind that like gatekeeping
Yeah,
nonsense.
but
But I
but it
do,
does
I
exist a
do,
little bit.
I do think there's something to be said for Square wanting to respect the legacy of one of their biggest titles, which is, I mean, if the 2 years of development they did with CyberConnect 2 was bad enough that they thought they had to scrap it, I think to me that says that they are like committed to doing this right, and I feel like
Yeah,
they know too that if they screw it up, they're going to have a million angry fanboys jumping down their throat.
yeah, I think you're right.
Let's talk about specific elements of this game. Is there a part of Final Fantasy VII that, let's just start on a positive note, that you would be excited to see in a big, bold, beautiful remake? So starting with you, Rob, is it whether it's an area or a fight or a character or summon, just one bit of Final Fantasy VII that you love that you can't wait to see in the remake?
Well, generally speaking, well, first let me back up. So I was reading a few of the remarks made by Nomura and the team today that were made recently about what they're trying to do with the remake, right? And what really piqued my interest was you mentioned that they were focusing on opening the game up, opening areas of the game up to players that weren't originally open to players in the original. So I took that to mean parts of the map that players just weren't allowed to go, whether
Hmm.
that was for story reasons or for design reasons.
Okay.
Very interested to see where that goes. And in addition to that, the lore piece, right? So now they're working with hindsight, right? So after their whole world of Final Fantasy or whatever debacle that was over the years, now they have the
Compilation of Final Fantasy
compilation
VII,
of Final
or
Fantasy VII. Yeah. Um,
or Fabula Nova Crystallis, or any of the world building attempts that they've made to various degrees of success.
um, but now that they have the benefit of kind of building up that lore just a little bit more, um, how they're going to work that into the story in a remake, right? So bringing in characters like Zack into the story just a little bit more intimately, right?
Yeah.
Maybe new story sequences, maybe fixing some things that are a bit nonsensical and don't make any sense, right? So I'm interested
Yeah,
to see how they tie all that in.
like Rude being alive in the sequels, even though the game, due to an admitted translation error, makes it seem like he died. Um, like that, there are some things from Seven, the original Seven, that could use an update.
And,
Yeah.
talking about Zack, in the original Final Fantasy VII, his death scene is basically just two soldiers shooting him and him falling over. But
Yeah,
in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, his death scene is an
One of the
unbelievably
most,
dramatic last stand with him fighting hundreds of soldiers.
and it is, and it is one of the most, like, I'm sorry, that cut scene, that scene at the end, literally, I cried. I'm not
Oh,
ashamed.
it rules! And
Yeah.
the and
It
and
is. Zach is such a good character.
the song that plays in Crisis Core, the price of freedom, is not in original FF7, and it's like the best song in Crisis Core. So if they made the Zack death scene like Crisis Core and included the song from Crisis Core, that would be the best implementation, or retroactive forward implementation of compilation of FF7 stuff. I would love that.
That's honestly what I want to see. Even though the compilation has its fair share of issues, and there and a lot of it, like the Advent Children's dumb, Dirge of Cerberus is dumb, but Crisis Core is really good.
I don't want to call anyone out, but when we were doing a shoot, it was when we did an episode a few months ago, and one of our panelists defended Dirge of Cerberus at length, and I was I didn't insult him or anything. But like my eyes widened because it's like, whoa, someone likes Dirge of Cerberus.
I mean, you know what though? There are things in Dirge of Cerberus. That's a whole deep rabbit hole. There are things in the compilation.
I avoided Dirge of Cerberus because I heard it was bad, so I was surprised to hear a full-throated defense of it.
I don't think I don't like it as a game, as a story. Though, there are worse.
But do you think bits and pieces of Dirge of Cerberus could sneak their way into the FF VII remake? Because I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know enough about it to really.
They absolutely could. They talk about Rob. You were talking about areas in the universe that weren't accessible. A big part of Dirge of Cerberus is getting into deep ground and a whole bunch of rejected Shinra experiments that kind of formed their own society.
Damn! So like some X-Men Morlocks.
Basically, and
Awesome.
then it gets more, and then the game gets more into Vincent and Hojo's backstory. My point is really that there's a lot of world building and little things in the compilation that are actually pretty good, and I think could actually be used to enrich the remake. If they go down that route, I think it would be very good to see that.
Agreed.
Yeah. There's a lot that they could draw from that isn't from the text of Final Fantasy VII that would make sense for inclusion in the remake, but again, expanding Zack's role, and or going deeper into the Turk / Shinra / Vincent backstory would make a lot of sense. And I just would like more Turks in general. I thought one thing that really jumped out at me about the first time I played Final Fantasy VII was, replacing the idea of an evil empire with an evil company, and having the sort of the knights, quote unquote, of the evil empire, quote unquote, being people in the suits and sunglasses, struck me as extremely cool and forward thinking in 1997. But so like if we I thought I liked the characters of Reno, Rude, Elena, and Song so much. I want to see the scene that Reno's first appearance with that Turks theme playing in the remake a lot. Like if they make the Turks cool again instead of the goofballs that they are in Advent Children, I would like that very, very much.
They were always kind of goofballs though.
But I don't know. They seemed more aloof and cruel in Final Fantasy VII, and they just went full goofball from the beginning in Advent Children.
One thing about Advent Children, and we talked about this before too, but it's kind of almost a meta commutation of how fans came to perceive the characters rather than how the characters actually were. Like Cloud being super emo again.
Yeah, Cloud is the biggest example of that. Like he's not like that.
And the Turks, are we worried that we might see emo Cloud as the main character of
kinda
of FF7 and not Cool Cloud?
Yeah.
I'm a little worried about that. They did say they were going to try and be true to his original characterization. This is from an interview with Nomura, where they said they want to do his arc right. And I'm hoping that's true. I hope they do get that right, because Cloud is kind of a dork in FF7, and it's adorable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole lot of room for them to work with these various different story elements they didn't really dive deeply into in the original, and even in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, if they're really pushing towards this installment structure, whether or not they actually end up calling it episodic or not. There's a lot of room.
We didn't mention that earlier, but the shortly after its announcement, or maybe a year or so after its announcement, it was announced. They revealed that Final Fantasy VII's remake was going to be segmented and not released all at once.
Yeah, I had my initial reaction to that was incredibly negative because I wasn't on board with it. But if the end product ends up being a quality product, you kind of whatever, right? But I think it gives them plenty of room to add meat to the story if they're going to be selling it that way. But I do imagine we're going to be seeing a whole lot of Final Fantasy 15 type DLC for this game as well. It's never going to end.
Yeah.
I honestly wonder if that episodic structure is still in the cards, but I don't have anything to base my doubt on other than a sneaking suspicion after the CyberConnect 2 fallout. But yeah, no, we're totally going to see like episode Tifa, episode Yuffie, episode. Remember Vincent's backstory? That's going to be DLC. We're going to call it episode Turk.
I would probably buy Final Fantasy VII Remake episode Highwind. I would buy that.
Me too.
So that kind of leaves a little bit of room for them to pull stuff out of the original Final Fantasy content wise, right? And I really hope they don't go that route.
That's like my worst fear.
Yeah. That would
like they're gonna make the penny arcade strip where people bring Aerith back to life by paying $1 real. I don't want that.
Let's be real. It would not be $1. It would be $20.
Yeah.
$20 to keep Aerith in your party.
Well, yeah, I think that DLC is inevitable, but what is DLC, I think, would be the bigger question. If there was if they take a segment of the game that was in the original Final Fantasy VII, and then they make it only available via DLC, people will riot. Or if not riot, people will be very upset online about it. Like, it's... but if it truly is side content or new content, then I think people will still be upset because no one's ever happy online on video game spheres. But it will be a little more accepted if it is new content or something that was not explicitly in original Final Fantasy VII. So that's gonna be so weird. I think DLC is inevitable. I don't think anyone's denying that. But what they make DLC will be of keen interest to people.
And I wonder how closely tied to any further development troubles they have, just how deeply tied into that this potential DLC will be, and the end state of the retail game. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean like 15 again?
Yeah.
I hate to keep bringing that up, but that is the go-to example of we didn't have time to finish this, so here is all the stuff we had to cut.
Final Fantasy XV was RPG Fans Game of the Year in 2016. It is currently 2018, and they are not done releasing bits and pieces of Final Fantasy XV.
And they won't be in 2019 either.
That was just a lot of numbers in the teens in a row, so I hope I didn't mix any of them up. But, yeah, Final Fantasy VII, I think... I don't want to compare it directly to Final Fantasy XV, but FF 15 is the most recent example that we have of a massive budget Final Fantasy project by Square Enix. And I hesitate to say it might be what FF VII Remake looks like, but... Do we think that's possible? That it comes out of the gate feeling incomplete, and it takes them years to properly complete it? Is that do we think that will happen or might happen?
I like to think not. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that way. Not that it'll be incomplete. If they're going to do it episodic, I want the episodes to be complete, like up to a certain point in the game, that's where it stops. And I want it to be a complete game, and then episode 2 also a complete game, if that's how they're going to do it. I'd hate to feel like Final Fantasy 15, where things are patched in that should have been there from the beginning.
Yeah, I'd like to think, for now, I'd like to think that they've learned some major lessons from Final Fantasy 15, from that whole development process fiasco, and post-release stuff. So as of right now, even with some of the troubles that have come to light, I'm still willing to give the benefit of the doubt, only because we really don't have much information to go off of at this point.
Mm-hmm. I believe that they are going to be, like I said, I think they only have one shot at this. I think that they know that if they screw it up, people are going to be mad. And this is one of their one could make an argument that this is their highest profile title ever. They don't want to screw that up. And I think they're going to be giving it the attention that it deserves during development. Now, whether or not that all pans out, we'll see. I know that when they first announced it and when they were showing it off, they showed action combat, stuff that looked kind of like 15. I honestly hope they don't go that route. And maybe it's just naive of me for hoping they would, because I think what a lot of people want is just they want the base game, but with the graphical update and some nods to the compilation.
Right. I would like that, but if they are gonna action game it up, like I want to have more control over my party members than what 15 offered, for instance. Like,
yeah,
7 is about your party. These are all iconic characters in their own right. They deserve to be controlled as a group, as a party. That'd be too detached from the Final Fantasy that we know. If you just control Cloud and you're jumping around like Noctis.
Yeah, maybe the biggest departure from original FF7 that we know of is this. It's going to be an action-oriented battle system and not turn-based. Now, that's not necessarily a negative. There's been a lot of good RPGs by Square Enix and others that are, have big, beautiful worlds and action battle systems that feel satisfying. But yeah, we want to be able to control each character individually because, like Leona said, these are iconic characters, and to only control Cloud would be a disappointment. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've seen Red 13 or Kate Sith in their remake look yet. And I bring up those two specifically because they're the I would say the most different silhouettes of the or the most unique silhouettes of this group.
The most cartoony.
Yeah.
They're very cartoon, and the style they're going for, from what we've seen, is very hyper realistic. So it'd be odd to see Kate Sith with his giant Moogle.
Yeah. What
costume.
are those two weirdos going to look like in this in this game? That is
maybe they'll do what they did with Advent Children, where he's just riding Red 13 around. But
yeah, they might do that. They might just focus on the little cat part.
But then what are they going to do with what's his name, with the Shinra guy who's speaking through Kate Sith?
Oh, yeah.
How are they going to handle that whole plot? Actually,
Reeve is the character. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how are they going to do that? Because that's one of the bits of 7 that is probably the most esoteric.
It's very subtle, that whole little, it was Reeve all along. That is really Kate Sith.
And when Kate Sith joins the party, you're in the Golden Saucer, and he basically walks into Cloud and joins you against your will, which is a strange choice. Like, they won't be able to represent that visually.
Do you guys remember when Kate Sith died? And then another one shows up.
Like, let's have a sad moment for Kate Sith. Oh, never mind, his replacement is here.
And have exactly the same equipment that I had when I was inside the shrinking temple.
Hey guys, I'm alive again. How did you manage that? I woke up when I was off screen. Neat.
Do not mourn me, for I was already dead.
Do not mourn me. I was a puppet already. This is just a backup puppet. It's like, okay, this takes the sting out of it a little bit, but I guess that's fine. I mean, how would we have reacted if the same thing happened to Eris? Like, like 30 minutes after, 30 minutes after she died, a second Eris goes like, "Hey, what's up? I'm the backup Eris. I know it seems weird, but just accept this, please."
Eris.
Like, she's
Eris with a PH.
So she's Krill. She's Krill from FF5 is what you're saying. Where, hi, I exist to be a replacement for Galef.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, this is kind of a pipe dream, but since someone I think you brought up Octopath Traveler earlier. One thing I have loved seeing about Octopath Traveler is, I mean, you see all these reports about that game selling out everywhere, and Square being surprised that their turn-based game is doing so well. And I'm not trying to sound like turn-based games are easier to make or cheaper to make or anything like that. So please don't misunderstand my comments. But I really think that Square is consistently seems to be forgetting that this part of their audience exists. And then they're always surprised when we turn out in droves to play one of these classic throwbacks. Do you guys think that if they made this FF7 remake more in the style of the original game, or any FF game for that matter, would it do better? Because for my money's worth, I think them going for a wider audience is missing the point a lot, because I don't think that wider audience is turning out for games like 15.
Do we know how well FF15 did?
I think it sold pretty well.
It sold very well, but I want to know how much of that is based on brand recognition and how much of that is based on. I mean, this is again, I'm not trying to sound dismissive, but your typical AAA video game customer who plays, they buy, let's say they buy maybe 2 video games a year and play a lot of Fortnite on the side. Are they gonna turn out for your big high profile action RPG? I want to know who's buying these games. Who do you think they're making these games for?
Well, that's a good question. But if Final Fantasy 15 sold extremely well, and I don't know its exact sales numbers, so I could be reaching here, then I think that crowd that is interested in Final Fantasy as brand recognition, the largest version of that crowd ever will come out for the Final Fantasy VII remake, and making it turn based. I don't know if that will help or hurt it or affect it at all. If and it is a pipe dream hoping that they'll go back to this version of the game. That's not happening. But
Like I said, I just think that's what a lot of people want to see. And I mean, for my money, it's like, okay, if they did it more like 12, or they did it more like Lightning Returns had a very interesting take on blending turn-based and action combat that I actually really enjoyed, or something like that, maybe. But a straight action RPG, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see it for Final Fantasy VII to be a straight action RPG. If not just for the way the game plays and the way it's all laid out, it's not action game centered. It's not designed around that. When you make an action game, your setting has to reflect that in a lot of ways.
But I think the Final Fantasy VII remake is an action game, and I think they are going to adjust the set shading to reflect that.
Yeah, but you'll have to make it a lot more. You're not going to see an overworld in a modern Final Fantasy remake action game. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be a big, more focused enemies rather than a bunch of little encounters. Sort of like Final Fantasy 15 did to an extent. It was these mobs are not really the focus.
Yeah, is the space in between Midgar and Calm going to look like FF 15 or Xenoblade? Like that
or is it going to look like 13? Is it going to be a very pretty hallway filled with combat encounters?
Yeah, that's an empty space in original Final Fantasy VII. But what on earth is that going to be in this? I think that is a question I have no idea what the answer is to.
They're already talking about enhancing quote unquote enhancing gameplay elements to include things like stealth and stuff like that, right? So where you would avoid the mobs on screen and all that jazz, basically. So they're definitely they've considered the impact of turning it into an action RPG. How that will ultimately turn out, right? It's really anybody's guess. I wasn't. So personally, for me, I was kind of underwhelmed with Final Fantasy 15's battle system. It was all right, but that's kind of how I felt about 15 in general. It was a good game, but I would be disappointed if the Final Fantasy VII remake battle system was anything really like Final Fantasy 15. To be honest,
I don't know. I think I know it's a really complicated issue, and I think our response, because it's like yeah, we don't want it to be an action RPG like 15, but we also are realistically, could they go back to turn-based? Do they want to do a hybrid blend? How is the level world and encounter design going to be adapted to fit whatever system they choose?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of badly trying to get at, is you'll have to design the whole game again around this new system. It's not something.
And they are.
Yeah, they are. And it's going to be a huge undertaking. It's a large world. It's a lot of plot. It's a huge game, really. And to make everything so detailed and high def, and it seems like it would take forever in development. And it's taking a long time, but it seems like it would take another 10 years to finish a game like that.
At this point, like I said, I'm keeping an open mind. But for me personally, I think worst case scenario for me is whatever they produce will have the same effect that Resident Evil 5 had for me. I was a huge fan of the Resident Evil series, and within the first hour of playing Resident Evil 5, my gut reaction was, this is not a Resident Evil game. What am I playing right now? So the worst possible scenario for me would be, this is not Final Fantasy VII. You just threw the characters and the lore on top of a game that really doesn't represent what the game was originally. And it's going to be tough to get that in between, right? You need to stay true to the original, which is what they say they're trying to do. But also, I guess, I mean, you got to appeal to the masses, right? And they're gonna be spending a ton of money on this game, with the potential for this to be theoretically one of, if not the biggest money makers of all time for them, right? So
Ideally, yeah.
So, I mean, I don't envy them. I don't envy them the task, basically.
No, it's a huge undertaking.
Agreed. Is there anything else that we are like a specific part of Final Fantasy VII that we're either interested in seeing or concerned about seeing in the remake? Peter, something unrelated to the combat or the basic action, like a specific scene or character you're interested in.
Let me think real quick. I am actually really curious. One thing I've been very curious about is how they would implement the weapons, the super bosses.
Oh yeah,
because the question those not only are those creatures, like the art for them is so impressive, and like I really love their design. In game, like I mean, in the original game, they end up being rendered as kind of these polygonal nightmares. But I would love to see the weapons brought to life with like modern graphics, like maybe new quest chains or more background details on them or something like that. That's something I would love to see.
maybe they'll go back to calling a weapon Sapphire Weapon again and give us a real boss fight for it.
Maybe they'll work in Omega weapon they added to Dirge of Cerberus. Who knows?
Yeah, and also those boss fights would be crazy since they're basically building-sized monsters. Are you just gonna whack at their ankles until they fall down, or is it a?
You're going to jump up their bodies.
So it'll be like a Colossus fight or something.
Yeah, something like that. If they're going to implement it, I imagine you'll be doing a lot of jumping up the body to attack the head or something like that.
So they probably won't have the Emerald Weapon punish you for overloading your characters with materia.
Probably not.
That's one question I have. Like, how is materia in general going to look like in this game?
It's just going to make your weapon elemental.
Yeah, like you plug in. I love the materia system, and I would love to see like, okay, how could they improve on this? But maybe that is. I don't want them to simplify it. I don't want them to be like, oh yeah, you just put the fire one on your sword, and now your sword is fire.
I think a loadout system could work. Like maybe you can't have 16 materia equipped like you could in the old days, but maybe you have like 8 button layouts and you load them out with 8 materia, and now each one can is mapped to a different button, like a loadout in a even in Diablo 3.
Yeah, that could be cool. Or they work it in like kind of like how the paradigm system worked in 13. Where like you can switch between them on the fly. So like maybe you have an elemental loadout of one type, and then you can switch to a physical attacking focused loadout. I'm curious if they'll still have it be tied to skill progression or not too. Again, that's a hypothetical, but that's a hypothetical depending on how the combat works, But
is there now? Rob, is there a favorite summon that you have in Final Fantasy VII that you can't wait to see in the remake? Because I remember thinking that seeing those Final Fantasy summons in 3D for the first time was a mind blow to me. Especially, not only does Bahamut look cooler than ever, there are 3 of him. So is there a summon that you really can't wait to see how they look? Because I don't think we've seen any summons yet in the materials we've been shown.
No.
No, I don't think so. I think the obvious one here to say is Knights of the Round, right? But I'm going to go with. I remember Odin being one of my favorite ones to summon in Final Fantasy VII. I think
his slow approach in the rain, where you hear the horse's hooves clopping.
I think that would look really, really cool.
Bahamut Zero would be cool to see.
Yeah, Bahamut Zero is really cool.
Yeah.
This might be an off the wall one, but I want to see Typhoon / Chupon. Because he was a weirdo in FF VI and looked even stranger in FF VII as this optional like hidden one. And he's exactly the kind of thing that might be cut out because he's already just an like a side quest reference. But if they incorporate summons and have them all look huge and beautiful, I want to see how that wind weirdo that sneezes at you from FF6 looks like.
I want to see Fat Chocobo.
Oh yeah. Do we think that there's going to be a like a detailed chocobo breeding and riding system? I mean, akin to even FF9 or FF14. Like, will you be able to raise chocobos in a ranch and then ride them around the world? Because I would want that. That sounds
I sure
great.
hope so.
You'd think
For
so. I mean,
for
chocobo breeding.
$14.99.
Chocobo breeding.
No.
I would love to have them have detailed chocobo breeding and racing in this game. That I would love that. But it would be really really hard to make an entire contiguous open world that allows you to ride a chocobo anywhere. Because I mean, with a world map, it's easier, right? Because you're going through navigating a simplified version of an entire world, and you can walk around it like an airship. But if they have everything interconnected and still incorporate chocobo breeding and racing and riding, I don't know how that looks.
I guess the racing and riding has kind of been done in 15, but they would have to elaborate on it a little bit more, I feel like.
Yeah, it would have to be the entire game would have to be like the first half of 15 before you jump into a linear tunnel. And I don't, and we don't need to comment on FF15 further than that. And I apologize if I oversimplified what FF15 is. I haven't played very much.
No, you
FF15.
didn't.
Oh, okay, but like
You did not.
all right, but like. Would we like navigating the FF7 world map like the first half of FF15? Because that was the part of FF15 I think people seem to like the best. Was the road trip part? Am I misunderstanding or misrepresenting that? Because you could ride around the tiny Bronco and chocobos like the car in FF15, except it's an FF7 world. And I think that could be cool, but we don't know enough about the open world setting and how connected these settings are to know.
I think what people liked more about 15 was traveling around with the buddies that you had in your
Right.
party. Like the characters are really what made it, because the world itself isn't super interesting. It's quite bland in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't say like traveling just for the sake of traveling was interesting in 15, but more the people, the characters that you had with you, and the little skits that they had, the camping, and I've got a new recipe. That all was what made it.
Yeah, like there are a couple pretty vistas in 15, but it's not really like as an open world design. I feel like if they want to do FF7 justice, they want to make the individual areas themselves more interesting.
Right.
And,
So they probably won't have that world map spacing. Like there's not going to be a giant chasm in between, say, I don't know, like between Corel and Gungaga and Cosmo Canyon. That's not going to be a long trip. That'll be a shorter, more guided trip.
So they're definitely going to have to redesign the areas to make it work for 2018 and in the way they're designing it. But I wonder if they do that, does that then make the world seem smaller than by necessity, smaller than the original Final Fantasy VII?
I think yes, because if they do it like that, I mean, to a degree, Final Fantasy X felt like a smaller world than every Final Fantasy game before it, because you couldn't really walk around the world in FF10. It felt vast, and I thought that that a lot of the world map navigation in 10 was cool. Like when I first played FF10, I didn't like it because I was salty about it not being like my previous favorite Final Fantasy games, like 6 and 7. But I warmed up to it relatively more recently. I think it's I think FF10 might be a realistic situation for FF7. Like instead of a big world map, there's long paths and long corridors between areas. Does that seem crazy to you?
No, I think that's a good way to go about it.
Take Xenoblade Chronicles 2, for example, or Xenoblade Chronicles in general, right? You can make the world, if you design it well, you can make it feel large scale, right?
And still segmented, yeah. But
it's still segmented. But are they able to do that with Final Fantasy VII, where, as you say, the spots in between locations are just there's nothing there, right? They're just kind of get from point A to point B. There's really nothing there to design around. So they'll have their work cut out for them in that case.
Yeah, honestly, I think 10 or 12 is the best model to follow if they're going to do that. Because 10, as opposed to 13's version of linearity, 10 does a lot of good little tricks and area gimmicks and just a bunch of ways to make it seem like you're exploring a world to kind of mask the linearity, even if you are just you are running down a very pretty hallway. But at least it's a very pretty hallway with stuff to do.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if FF7 Remake will be an open world more like 15 or a segmented open world, quote unquote open world like FF10 or 12. But I think that 10-12 approach might be sensible. And if they again, like you said, Peter, if they make it dense enough and interesting enough, then people will accept it. But I don't know if they'll be able to recreate that feeling of a world map in FF7 because it's that's a challenge. That's weird to think about.
We'll end up riding Cloud's motorbike all the way. It's just going to be like a
Now that's
road.
a mini game I want to see in this remake.
The hack and slash.
The motorcycle. I think when I was a kid, I wanted a game that was all that because between that and the snowboarding and the submarine, the motorcycle was the coolest of them.
Yeah,
but they made that and it sucked. The mobile game.
Well, a mobile Final Fantasy mini game sucking? No, never. I don't believe you. Well, what else do we have to discuss? Because I mean, if we went down every single thing about FF7, we would be here for 3.5 hours, and I don't think anybody wants that.
I'm just wondering about like optional like places like Fort Condor, how that'll be handled.
Yeah, like Fort Condor. Will they make Wutai a mandatory part of the game? Because
Yeah, you can go there earlier, and you can visit Wutai earlier than the plot, and then you have a whole sort of skit with Yuffie and stuff. But
yeah, I feel like they pretty much have to make Vincent and Yuffie more integral to the plot because they're missable. They're missable in 7, but they're so important to the extended canon, quote unquote. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, recording either of them is actually a little complicated in FF7. So it's I think they would have to incorporate them more into the main plot. I think I think that would be welcome. I wouldn't mind seeing that, but I'm curious as to how they would do it and how deep they go into Vincent's backstory and the Wutai side quest, if at all. Like if they include Vincent and Yuffie, they would have to include Vincent's background cutscenes and maybe even Dirge of Cerberus stuff, and they would have to include Wutai. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, I don't think so.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
And the Game of Death style side quest in Wutai where you have to go up each floor of the tower. I want to see that in the remake. That's dope as hell.
well, that just feeds into your battle tournament love.
Yeah, no, it is 100% attached to my love of battle tournaments and shonen manga and 1970s martial arts movies. I just made a Game of Death reference 20 seconds ago.
The gold saucer would be cool to see if they do that.
Yeah,
Again.
The gold saucer is awesome in FF14, and if they bring back the FF7 version of the saucer, bring it. But the question is it going to be like the FF14 gold saucer, and are they going to bring back? Are they going to add a card game to FF7?
Oh, gee.
Because triple triad's pretty good in FF14. So, one thing that we talked about before we started recording and haven't brought up yet is Wall Market. The Cloud infiltrating Don Corneo's mansion dressed as a woman.
Yep.
Which that whole side quest is loaded. You have to go and get the right drink from a vending machine. You end up in a squats competition at a gym, and perhaps most famously, visit a joint called the Honeybee Inn. How much of that do we think is going to make it into the Final Fantasy VII Remake?
I think a lot of it will make it in. I don't think the Honeybee Inn will win. I think the cross-dressing will make it in because it's a fan favorite sort of side quest. It's like what a lot of people think about when they think about Final Fantasy VII is the Cloud cross-dressing.
I like the very demure way Cloud runs when he's dressed as a woman.
His hands clasped in front of him. Oh, I must run this way now. I am a woman.
Yeah,
I think they've actually already stated they were going to include that. Actually,
right. Yeah, I'd be shocked if they didn't include it. Like, even though, maybe like today's political climate, people might view it as offensive. I don't think it's offensive, but some people might.
I think they need to try. Sorry.
No, sorry. Go on.
They should probably tread a little delicately when it comes to the bathhouse.
I'm a little bit more concerned about how they're portraying Don Corneo because he's horrible.
Yeah, I think there are a few things they can handle a little better for today's gamer, and I think they will. I mean,
Yep.
I think um, that the whole cross dressing bit is definitely part of the Final Fantasy VII DNA, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
What fans remember, but I do think um, the honeybee in piece. I think that I mean that could be completely cut out of it, to be honest, and still you wouldn't lose anything from that whole entire
Well, I mean, it would still people
side
would
quest.
still view it as cut content and be upset about it, even though it's it's ludicrous already on its own.
This
Um,
Yeah.
true. That's true. That's true.
I don't think I would miss it necessarily, but it would be it's challenging to implement it. If they do choose to implement it, I'm very interested to see it.
It's so weird. Like the horrible homosexuality in Final Fantasy VII and the honeybee in part is so weird. Is growing up, before I came out as transgender, I've identified as a gay boy, and seeing gay not coded characters, as horrible as the presentation was, it was like, oh, like gay characters in a game. But it's so hard to balance whether like that's acceptable to have in a game these days. Like,
there's homophobic scenes in Japanese RPGs as recently
oh
as
yeah,
this
Persona
year.
5.
So like I don't want
It's
to I don't want to mischaracterize like all of Japanese RPGs as homophobic, but some scenes in Final Fantasy VII were insensitive at best, transphobic or homophobic.
mhm.
Transphobic or homophobic at worst. And if they include all of that in the remake, um, I don't know if toning down is the right phrase, but they would have to adjust it or present it in a different way to make it acceptable.
Yeah, or would they? I mean, there's a lot. I don't think it's a big conversation happening in Japan right now. Is like the way homosexuality and transgender issues are presented in video games. I mean, it's still very much the butt of a joke in a lot of media. And Square Enix, as a Japanese company, are they going to really edit it that much to be pro, or are they just going to edit the whole thing out?
It's honestly the same with the dating mini game at the Gold Saucer, where
Yeah.
where Barrett can end up, because Barrett being the date, if you screw up the conversations with the ladies, is meant to be the butt of a joke, and
Yeah.
it's not a funny joke. It's
Yeah.
I so that's the thing. That's another thing where it's like, are they going to keep that? Are they going to lose it? Is Barrett not going to be an option anymore? Or can Barrett, or are they going to change it so it's like, okay, no, this is totally cool. Maybe this is a form of player expression, and maybe Cloud can choose Barrett as a partner. I don't know. That's what I'd like to see.
I'd like
But
to see that. Like,
can we recruit Vincent earlier so he can be one of the options?
no, it's Barrett or nothing.
Okay, cool. I'm cool with that.
That'll be an interesting question to see. I think people will be racing to that date to figure out what it's like when the remake eventually does come out, which might be 2023. I don't know. But the one thing that I'm the most shocked about in this discussion is that we've gone this far without really mentioning Sephiroth.
Oh yeah. Oh crap.
Like,
Um,
unless someone talked about him for 15 minutes and I zoned out, which is possible. I'm a little tired right now. But again, I think Sephiroth is a very important part of FF7. He's been so present and around for 20 years that I'm sure all of us have our different thoughts about him. But in original FF7, you don't even see what he looks like until the flashback scenes in Calm. So
yeah.
he's almost like a Jaws figure. I think I might have used that analogy in other podcasts. But you see his destruction and what he's capable of, and you know his name in the first part of the game in Midgar, and because you see the aftermath of his bloody murder spree in the Shinra office building. I am very excited to see Sephiroth walking into flames scene in this new engine. I'm sure that will look awesome. But how they incorporate Sephiroth into the game, like, is he going to be that like silent, invisible antagonist at the beginning, or is he going to be present from the beginning because everyone knows who Sephiroth is and by now, or is he
Uh,
going to be are you still going to be sort of chasing the invisible Sephiroth, or is he going to be more present in the story? I really am curious about that because what even if your feelings about Sephiroth have changed in between 1997 and now, he's a very important part of FF7.
well, I hope they keep it. I hope they keep it as the original because to me, um, one of the best parts of the story, at least early on, was that sense of chasing this mysterious man in black, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, just the chase, that air of mystery that surrounded this
Oh yeah.
this evil doer, right?
It was a
And I
good
think
thrust for the main plot.
it was, and I think if you regardless of how how much in gaming pop culture he has appeared in the last 2 decades since the game's release. I think if you introduce him early on, you completely remove that. And again, to me, one of the most memorable aspects of that story was just that mysterious stranger, right?
The aura,
Causing havoc and mayhem.
yeah, the aura of mystery surrounding Sephiroth. As you're learning more about him, you're chasing him. You're relying on Cloud's kind of imperfect memory of the situation. Um, yeah, Sephiroth has kind of gone on to become this like the big time popular by shonen fantasy villain, that Final Fantasy villain that we all know and love. But there's a real air of menace and mystery to him in Seven that I
And
would like to see
even when
preserved.
yeah, because you find out what Sephiroth looks like pretty early in Carol,
Yeah,
but he's still an invisible presence for most of the game, and it's and like even when you cross the swamp for the first time, you see the Zolom stuck on a pole. It's like, oh
yeah.
damn,
And
this.
it's also, yeah, and then I think they could also stand to make it a little clear how the Genova cell and Genova clone thing works, because you have all these other cloaked figures that are like, I don't know, part of it's just the translation of the original FF7, but
Yeah.
it's a little hard to figure out whether these guys are failed Sephiroth clones or failed Genova clones
Yeah.
or other
Back to the old
experiment.
back to the old Final Fantasy forums bit. I mean, people have been arguing about what all that means for decades, and I don't think it's totally figured out yet.
I think that they did give a hard answer from the Ultimanias, but that's another thing that there's actually the Seven Ultimania is actually going to be getting an English release by the end of this year,
Cool.
and I'm really excited to read that. Yeah, they're compiling them together, but they can play up the Lovecraftian angle of Genova a lot too.
Yeah, having it be sort of more alien horror and not just a blobby like vaguely defined Final Fantasy monster. That would be cool. Like imagine if Genova appearing on the boat following Junon. What if they made that like an alien loose in the spaceship kind of thing?
Yeah, or they go straight up what's that one? I don't even remember the name of it. It's one of the Lovecraft stories involving a bunch of like plague rats, I think, like something like that. You could do a self-contained little spooky episode with that with one of the Genova forms.
Yeah, more horror elements about what's going on with Sephiroth and Genova. I would welcome that, and I don't even love horror stuff in games, but in this case, I think it would an interpretation like that would fit, and it would be it would fit with what FF7 is, but also be different from FF7 in a way that I'm interested now. Now I want that. Damn it, Peterman! Now I want something that might not happen. Thanks, buddy.
I mean, welcome to the FF7 remake discourse, my friend.
Oh boy. Thanks, guys, for coming together to talk about FF7 with me. I mean, we could have made this episode 3 hours if we were just, going through the FF7 plot points and key elements one by one. But I knew we couldn't do that, so we ended up having this be an open-ended, messy episode that I think had a lot of good discussion, though. So thanks so much for finally coming together to do this. Because again, we've had this thing in our planning document for multiple years, probably. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, no, I think I can't even remember when I actually pitched this idea.
It might have been like 2016. I don't know. I'd have to check. I'd have to check the document. But that's a long time, and I'm glad we're able to finally make it happen. So thank you guys for recording this with me, and thank you listeners for listening to us blab about Final Fantasy VII for an hour and a half. But we're enough living in the present. Let's look to the future. Next week we have our first Shadow Hearts episode. Shadow Hearts is the game that we picked for August for Retro Encounter. So there's going to be two Shadow Hearts episodes. The first one next week and the second one in 3 weeks, because 2 weeks from now that's episode 150. Big milestone for the podcast, and we are making episode 150 a mailbag episode. So listeners, please send in emails to retro@rpgfan.com. We will read as many as we can on episode 150 and answer every question that is directed to us, unless it's openly hateful or hostile. We probably will skip those. But if you have a question about the podcast or a suggestion for a future episode idea, we want to hear them, and the way to send them to us is email retro@rpgfan.com. In addition to our email, RPGFan has forums. There's a Twitter. There's a Facebook account. There's a Discord, of which Leona is one of the moderators. There's an Instagram that's curated by our social media maven, Stephanie. And there's a whole nother podcast, Random Encounter, hosted by Derek Heemsberg, and goes bi-weekly and is more attached to current events than this podcast. You can find links to all of those things on the front page of rpgfan.com. There's also an RPG Fan Twitch page with stuff streaming every week. Please check the RPG Fan main page to find out what is streaming that particular week. So, let's see. Let's tell the listeners how they can reach us each individually, starting with you, Leona.
I go by Starmongoose on Twitter, and you can find me hanging out on the Discord server, which I'm a moderator, also Starmongoose.
And Rob.
Get me on my email, my RPG Fan email, rob@rpgfan, and Beardy McBeardface on the RPG Fan forums.
Cool. And Peter, your turn.
Yep. I mean, as always, you can always find me, PeterT@rpgfan.com if you want to email me. I'm also at I Have Fury on Twitter.
Cool. And I am Sollosi at rpgfan.com for my individual email. I am at The Real Monsoon on Twitter, at Evoker for Dogs other times on Twitter. I am Monsoon Mike on Discord and Monsoon on the forums. Boy, I think that's all of my social media presence. But that about does it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is maybe the biggest question mark existing right now for Square Enix. It has the potential to be the biggest release they've ever made because it has the biggest built-in fan base that they have, and is a remake of perhaps their most beloved game. Again, it depends on where we properly rate Final Fantasy VII, but let's not go back to that discussion. There's a lot to be excited about and a lot to be worried about. Is that a fair ending statement?
Yep, sounds accurate.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Oh boy, welcome to the Final Fantasy VII Remake discourse. Thank you. Good night, and good luck.
Because you're going to need it.